morning. It's good to see everybody here. We have quite a few people who've been out that start tripping back in, so you got to see that. We're getting deep in the Bible study on disciple making. It's not really a detour, but we're talking about personal growth. And this personal growth is the development of how we're going to be able to interact with people. One of the biggest challenges we have doing Bible studies is that we have a hard time finding people to talk to us, right? To sit down and have a study with us. And so this is kind of not really reimagining, but for some of us, it's a reimagining of it. And it was for me for a long time. It's reimagining how we could approach this. So the goal is that we have people asking us questions, talking to us about the Bible, and recognizing that we have something to offer so that they would actually trust us enough and want information from us. And we all would agree that the odds of us being successful in our Bible studies, if they ask for the study, is far greater than if we ask them. And that's kind of a given. So that's the idea. And the more we develop ourselves and grow into what God has created us to be, then the more likely it is that we're going to find other people that will interact with us in a way. Because, as I said before, we're all unique, we're all different in the way we approach things, and that's because of our circumstances, even our pains, our difficulties, our talents, our skills, all the things that relate to who we are and where we are in life. We're there for a reason, and we can find people in that area also who can relate to us, because we generally speaking, we're all supposed to be like Jesus, of course. But how we become more like Jesus is by living in the circumstances where we are and taking advantage of the opportunities that we have based on who we are and our skills and all those kinds of things. We all have different abilities. And so while there are a lot of things that overlap with us, we all can do a lot of the same things. There are some things that we alone are going to be able to do, and that's because of our circumstances and where we're at. And so, ask the question. I used to always ask the question, what would Jesus do if he were walking in our shoes? He would act differently in your shoes than he would in mine. Not that he would be any less holy, but he would do things differently based upon skills and talents and abilities and opportunities. You can't do something unless you have an opportunity to do it, right? So we all have these different opportunities and identities because of that. And our goal is to find those people. We're unique, but we're not so unique that no one can relate to us. So as we have gone through experiences and as we're trying to live in the way that God tells us in the Word, we should be able to affect other people. So the first part of this is 3 stages. The first stage of this has been about figuring out what that is, trying to figure out who I am, who you are, what we can do as Christians in service to other people. And some of us have that down pretty well, and some of us don't know. I've mentioned before, I've talked to people that have told me they didn't know where they fit in the church. That's a shame, and I don't think it's necessarily, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. The shame in that is that we're not nearly as effective if we don't know what we're doing, right? And so the more we figure those things out, the better off we're going to be. And it's going to take some thought. It's going to take some time to really consider about it and pray about it. Ask for God to help you see opportunities about it, things like that. So there also has to be personal change and development. And as we grow as Christians, we become better and better at, if you notice, for example, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. How many of those relate to the way we treat other people? All of them, yeah. So the more we grow, the better at interacting with other people we're going to get. That's the theory. That's the idea. And the better we get at interacting with other people, the better better opportunities we're going to have, the more opportunities we're going to have, and doors open that you would never think would open. You have opportunities that you never dream would happen, and people will contact you. They will, and they'll just talk to you, and they'll ask questions, and And we have to be smart enough when we see a burning ember. What do you do? Anyone ever started a fire from scratch? You know, I don't think I've ever done it, except for I have a lighter, right? But even that, even if you're putting charcoal together, even with lighter fluid sometimes, what do you do when you first have that flame? First little thing, very gently though, right? Do you take a big fan and go, not then, later on, right? So sometimes our approach we have to be careful in how we do this, and that's going to be other topics. But I do want to say, when we have those little embers sometimes that flare up, and you see a little bit of interest, sometimes we overwhelm and when we're trying to deal with them, and it scares them, it pushes them off, and because they don't know if they can trust you exactly yet. Remember those rings that we talked about before, those rings, circles of influence. And as they get closer and closer to that inner circle with you, you're building trust. That's all that's about, and there's different steps to it. So I want you to keep that in mind, but right now we're not trying to bring people close to us. We're trying to reach out and become more and more. So the second stage of growth is where we're at today. That is refining your fingerprint, for lack of better words. I don't really like the term fingerprint, but it fits, so I keep using it. So this is coming into this as making some assumptions. It's assuming that you've developed at least a decent idea of what you can do to serve other people, your fingerprint, or at least you have some ideas of ways that you can begin to serve God if you're not doing so right now. Now, all of us are serving God in different ways. I realize that. But we can all improve, and we can all... Sometimes the service that we're performing is out of necessity instead of out of strength. And so if we have those necessities where we're doing things that are not necessarily our greatest strength, keep doing it, because that may be where you are right now. But as we have opportunity, we're working toward our strengths to help other people, and that kind of thing. So we're assuming that. It's also assuming that you're willing to start serving other people in different areas if you're not already doing that, and that you're willing to start serving people outside the church. Now, this is where it really is going to be effective. Most of the time, we think about service. We think within the walls here, and I know we don't mean like you can only do stuff at church, at the church building, but we act sometimes as if the people that we serve are only Christians, and that shouldn't be the case. Which in the priorities, which are more important, Christians or non-Christians? I know that's a terrible way to phrase it, but which gets our priority? Christians, yes. And we have that, he says in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, do good to all men, especially to those of the household of the faith. Sure. But there also should be some time that we recognize that other people outside the church are important enough that we would serve them in some way. And that should be how we start interacting with people. And when you do that intentionally, you start finding people who will understand what you're doing and appreciate what you're doing, and you're building relationships with that way. And I may be preaching more to preachers than to other members, but this has been a challenge for me. Is a lot of the time, the people that I interact with is you guys, and especially in my past, it's been I'm doing lessons, I'm doing visits, I'm doing all kinds of things that relate to the congregation, and rightfully so, but you got to get outside the walls. Yeah.
I don't know how many people here would have seen it about a decade old. Who is a very famous atheist, once went on the record in saying that he appreciated the Christians who decided to give him the Bible. That at the end of the day, for him, it was, if you are a person who claims to want as many to go to heaven as you possibly can, how much do you hate somebody who's not want to talk to you? You should want to have that conversation. You should love people enough to do that. I think beyond what we read biblically, to hear something like that from somebody who is an avowed atheist should be more of an encouragement to us.
Yeah, I saw that video too. It was pretty amazing that he said he didn't believe it, but he respected the people that tried, right? Because, I mean, why wouldn't you? If you think that they're going to go to hell and you decide you're not going to do anything to help, Now, there's a difference between thinking you can't do anything and deciding not to do anything, but I still see his point. But you can interact with people and affect lives that way. So this is also assuming that then one of the reasons personal growth is so important. We can interact with people all day long, every day, but if we never bring up spiritual things with them, they're never going to know anything about us. So we can be a quote-unquote closet Christian. It's like I've met people, and I've seen this in the real world working force, where you wouldn't know they were Christians. But I heard a man the other day was talking about a friend of his at work that said he's going to go to preaching school, and he said, I had no idea. I'd known him for 10 years. I didn't even know he's a Christian. Well, how would they not know? The only reason they wouldn't know is because you've never said anything or you've never indicated any way. I mean, we all can do good deeds. Buddhists do good deeds. Atheists do good deeds. So there is a difference here between what we're saying, what I'm talking about, just doing good deeds versus doing good deeds with spiritual purpose. And so we have to keep that in mind as well, but still it's part of it. So the number one reason we're not good at making disciples is because we're just not interacting with people in a way that builds confidence and trust. And that's what we're trying to develop. And I've also learned that people won't trust you to help them if they can't see that you're able to help. And that's the case. Even if they see that you're able to help, they still may not trust you. So that's coming back to the inner circle here. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 3, please. We'll start in verse 1, just to help keep in context here. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. So we're talking about honing our efforts. That is, you recognize where you can serve and where your talents are and all these things that we talked about in the last few weeks, actually. And hopefully you're working through that. Then as you're putting it into practice, you're starting to hone it. You're starting to hone your abilities and actually more clearly define what you're doing. That relates to three different things: patience, kindness, and goodness. All right, so the first one is patience. And the idea of patience here is actually demonstrated very well in verse 3. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. The word patience generally means for us, if we're being patient with someone, that implies that they're doing something to anger us, right? That's usually what we mean by the word patience, but the word is a lot broader than that. And there are many different words in the Bible that could be translated patience. And they're also translated in other ways. Endurance is another example of that. Continuance is, I think, one word that's used. But there is it's a larger definition than we think. So the Greek definition of this, the word is called macrothumeo. And the only reason I bring up the Greek is simply to illustrate the meaning. It's just two different words that are put together. Macro sounds like an English word, doesn't it? What does macro mean? Sorry? A larger area. So it's talking about scope. It's talking about your vision scope. It's a broader range. And micro versus macro, right? We have microevolution and we have macroevolution. That is the big changes that are supposedly made. And the other word is thumea. Thumea is a word that means passions. And so you have two words that are put together, and it sounds, if you don't understand the definition sounds like you're saying large passions. But that's not really what it's talking about. It's talking about, macro is more about time than it is about size. So it's talking about passions over a long period of time. And the definition normally is given that it's someone who holds his anger for a long period of time. He doesn't explode, he doesn't get angry for a long period of time. And that's a legitimate way of looking at what patience is. There's also another way of looking at it. There's two heads of the coin, and that is that we are being patient in the sense that we are enduring, we are passionate about something for a long period of time. That it's related to the focus, it's related to drive, and it is talking about the actions that we're going to be taking. So it can be a long time, and it means waiting for a long time before becoming angry, but it also has the positive ramification, positive identification, that is our limits, our ability to endure pain over a long period of time. It's easy for us to maintain things over long periods if they're fun and if they're easy, right? I mean, I generally have no problem doing things that I enjoy, and I can be very consistent with those, right? But I don't usually find it as easy to be consistent with the things that I don't enjoy or that hurt. This is inherent in the idea of pain. And the reason it's so important to recognize that is because the difference between patience and endurance is often in the way that we view the situation. So I was doing a lot of research and reading, and I was trying to understand why is it sometimes it's translated patient, sometimes it's translated endurance. And I ran across someone who, and I can't remember who it was, I'm sorry, but they said basically that patience is about how we choose to face pain. Let me just read this because it helps. The main difference between the two words seems to be the difference between people who can lay aside pain and suffer versus those who cannot. So our ability to lay aside, to ignore pain for a cause is what this is about, at least in part. So it's, two sides of the same coin. In other words, the difference between people who willingly accept pain as part of the process of achieving something and those who receive pain that has nothing to do with achievement. So there's two categories with pain, right? There's pain that all of us suffer, that we're going to, when I turned 40, every morning I woke up and I had pain. It wasn't because I was pursuing something, sometimes it was, but that's just life. We have pain, we have accidents, we have things, we have troubles. Those are people who are enduring pain, but the ones who are patient are the ones who not only have those things, but also recognize, hey, there's a path that I need to go along here. And on this path, I'm going to have pain. I'm going to have troubles. I'm going to have trials. And they choose to do that in spite of the fact that they know they're going to have pain. So they're actually choosing to have the pain. Now, that's what we're really dealing with here. This is not about necessarily how we handle pain. This is about whether we endure pain for a purpose. And any of the pains that we have we can use them to grow. But we all recognize that if you're going to make something worthwhile, if you're going to do something worthwhile, there's a cost involved, right? So if you're going to be effective in evangelizing, you're going to be effective in reaching people and bringing them to the gospel, it's going to cost you something. That's life. The question is, do we think that it's worth it? So how do we endure the pains and the troubles and the trials that we have going along this pathway? Instead of getting discouraged and giving up, what do? How do we handle that? Sorry? We don't do it? Well, that is an option, right? We don't have to go and do the things. But typically, if we want to do something that's effective and good, we're going to have to pay the price. So we have to decide whether or not we want to do it, right? So that a lot of people give up. When you first start off, you first start doing something. The task in your mind seems a little bit overwhelming, but you have an idea. You're setting off on the course of plan. This is what I'm gonna accomplish with my life. When you first start, is that the easiest time or the hardest? Yeah, it's easy. It's easy to start, right? But then after a few steps, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Because there's always things you didn't count on. Then it starts to dematerialize. Your vision of what you're going to do, it dematerializes, and you start seeing reality for what it is, right? That's how it works. So if you want to go from point A to point B, and this is a good thing that you believe you should be doing, you've convinced yourself of it. So that's the first part of the first stage. How do you get through to the end? Keep your eye on the end. Yes, exactly. So we have this macro vision of what we're trying to accomplish. When we get to, you've heard it getting caught up in the weeds, right? We've heard other way of saying it is, you're seeing, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're so caught up in the right now and the things that are happening right now and the pains that it's easy to just say, just forget this. I'm not going to do this. And you back off. And who is the one who, think about this, between us and God, if God has let's say, for lack of better terms, in his mind, he has an idea for you to do something. And you recognize that you have opportunities and you choose not to do that. Does that mean that you're hurting God? No, obviously not. Who's it hurting? You, to a degree. But the people that you would have affected are being affected by that, or they're not being affected when you could have affected them. So this is important. Now, we can't do everything. We shouldn't feel like, well, if I see a task and I refuse to do it, that I'm lost. That's not the point at all. You can't do everything. There are a million ways you could go in this life, right? And you're not going to be judged and held accountable for all those millions of things that you couldn't do. But we have to do something. And we're looking forward to growth. We're looking for ways that we can increase the kingdom and increase our own selves. We're going to find things to do. And we should be looking for those opportunities. And as we see them, we're going to grow. Now, this could be something that's a very small thing that we see an opportunity to do something, so we go do it. Or it could be a larger path that we're saying, I'm going to commit myself to doing this for my life. And as I do this, I'm going to bring other people to God through that. That's what I'm talking about. And as we go back to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 3, he says, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners and against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. So there's two ways that Jesus helps us in this situation. One, we recognize that he did it, that he endured to the end. And by the way, what was it that pushed him to, in verse 2, pushed him to continue on to the cross? The joy set before him. You see, what he was looking at was not the cross, although he was very aware of it. It was beyond the cross that he was looking for. He had a bigger picture of what's going on. So he did it. That's an encouragement to us that, okay, he did it, we can do it too. He can help us through. And also, we see how he did it. How is that? Having a bigger picture. Recognizing that there's something to gain that is worth the pain that I'm going to go through to get it. And that's how we build patience. And that's the only way I know how to do it. I'm talking about patient continuation in the work, continued growth. We can also use the word faithfulness there, but faithfulness also has the idea of conviction. So not only do we have the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish, but we also have the conviction that it's worth it, that this should be done. And that's not easy for us to gain, right? We have to make a decision. We have to choose. And it's not easy to choose. So you have a condition, everyone knows, we all know how easy it is to choose between good and evil. Now, theoretically, we don't always choose the good. But that's an easy decision to make, right? If someone puts it in front of you, you have this and you have this. This is evil and this is good. What are you going to choose? You're always going to choose the good, if you're being intentional about it. But what if they give you, here's something good and here's something good and here's something good? How do you choose? Carefully. And what we tend to do is dabble in all of them. At least that's what I do. I tend to dabble in all of them, and I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and just can't pass up too many good opportunities. We would be much better off if we said, I'm going to do this one, and commit ourselves to do it, convince ourselves that it should be done, and pursue it, because we're going to make a lot more progress that way, right? And ultimately, does it matter? I don't know if it matters or not. If you have 3 good options and you choose one of them, how can you say that that's a bad choice? We may have other things. We may look at other people doing other things and say, well, the grass is greener on that side. I should have gone that way. It coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? But someone said the only reason that the grass is greener on their side is because of all the manure that they're going through. Well, it's a possibility. I don't know. And also, we also know that the grass is not greener on the other side, right? Have you ever looked at someone and said, man, I wish I had their life. I wish I could do the things that they do. I did that with my father-in-law. I wished that I could be like him, and still do in a lot of ways. But I realized I can't be like him. I'm me, and that's not who I am. Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a hard decision to make. One of the things they told me in preaching school, and I've seen this to be true, is the hardest decision a preacher is going to make is whether or not to leave. And I'm not saying that as a threat. I'm not even considering that. But that is one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, because you have a good work and you have a good work. Which one? And and the reason is because we all know it's like no pain, no gain, right? And it's okay to feel overwhelmed, because all that does is teach us to rely on God. And how much abuse did Jesus accept whenever he was on this earth? So we have the ability and the right to accept abuse to a degree, right? But then we also recognize that we don't have to do those things. If we have a situation where after careful consideration, I think I just need to back off and do something else, sure, we have that right. But the problem is if we do that too often, it becomes easier to say, well, it's hard, so I'm going to do something else that'll be a little bit easier. It may not be easier. It may not even be any better. So I understand what you're saying. Having that balance is really hard. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's true. Encouragement from others. So that's a good point. If you can't do it on your own. So that is part of the equation for sure. Yeah. And there's times when all of us have asked this question. I've asked this question. I've been preaching since '99. And I've asked the question more than once. I wonder if things would have been different if I'd have gone a different way. Have you ever asked that before? There's no way I'm going to go back now. But I've asked the question, and that's one of the challenges that we have. None of us have a voice from heaven saying, you're going to do this. No one. This is the danger of saying that you've been called to preach, which is not true. We've been called by the gospel to become Christians. And God may have a path for you. He may have ideas of what He wants you to accomplish. And that's why I said earlier, I don't really like using that term, because how would you know it if God wanted you to do something? There's nothing spelled out in here, okay, Holly, this is what I want you to do. There's nothing. He does. Right. Yes, He does. But even with our desires, they change, right? And so we have to be. I don't know how to say that. And it's easier for people in the religious world it's easier for them to say, well, God whispers to me and He tells me where I should go. That's, first of all, that's faulty reasoning. It's dangerous reasoning. And secondly, just because we have an opportunity to do something doesn't mean that we should. I mean, how many times we've fallen into that, right? I don't know how many times I've had that. But anyway, the idea is patience. And without conviction, there's not going to be much patience. But with patience, we have to see the bigger picture. We have to keep our eye on the prize. And that's what keeps you going. And when you get into the weeds and you're raising family and you're raising kids, it's easy to get caught up in the now, where you get discouraged and you think, oh, I'm so tired of this, I can't handle this anymore. So many problems come up. But if you keep your eye on the bigger picture, what are you trying to accomplish with the family, for example? What are you trying to do? And we have good vision on what that should be. All right, so that's the idea of patience. The next one is the idea of kindness. Let's go to Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. This says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." All right, kindness relates to decisions that we make about our attitudes toward other people. It has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with the decisions that we make about them or related to them. A kind person is one who sees others in the best light possible. And that's a challenge, because that means we're going to see people as God sees them. That's the goal. One of the difficulties of that is we can't just ask God to reveal to us how He sees people. How would we know how God sees people? How do we know how God sees people? Okay, so we know generally good and evil. He can see us as good or evil. That's one of the reasons that I would love to have a day. Wouldn't you like to go back in time and just watch Jesus for a day? I mean, it wouldn't be enough. I would like to hold 3 years, but for a day. How did He interact with people? How did He see them compared to how the Pharisees saw them, for example? They saw them very differently. So how do we know? The only way we can know is to look at what God teaches us in His book and balance that with grace, balance that with His mercy, balance that with His justice, all these different things. Yes, so he may see someone caught up in sin. And as Jesus demonstrated, did He immediately, when He saw these people caught up in sin, what was His attitude toward them? Hatred, disgust, compassion. How did He see them? As valuable. Even though they were caught up in sin, He saw them as valuable enough to make the effort, right? So the way we see other people relates to how we choose to see the world. And if we choose to see people in the way that God sees them, we're going to make some adjustments to our attitudes toward them. So, for example, the sermon this morning is about how to treat people when they do wrong. Well, whenever we face people who've done things that are wrong, we go and talk to them. I'm giving away some of the sermon, but we all know this. What is our attitude toward a person who has sinned against us? What should be our attitude when we go and talk to them? What should be our goal? Sorry? Restore. Yeah, not to win, not to punish, but to restore them to God. That's the goal that we're trying to accomplish. And so how do we see them? We see them as people who are important enough for us to do something to help. Yeah, right. And love implies that we're going to go to them, and sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's hard on them, but it's still love, right? So, we see someone. This is. Anybody ever saw that video with the woman talking to a man, her husband? She says, "It just hurts. It's just a pain, and it's so much pressure." And she has a nail in her forehead. Remember that? I don't know if you have ever seen that. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen to me, because the response is always, "That's because you're a man. You don't get it." But she kept talking about how this nail was causing pain and suffering, and she just wanted to gripe about it. And her husband was like, I can take that out for you. You don't get it. You don't understand. But I can help you fix that. You don't understand. So I understand that they're trying to say, well, women sometimes just need to talk, just like men need to talk. Okay, fine. It's a terrible way to show it to me. But a loving person would say, walk up to that woman who is in misery and suffering, grab her head and say, hold on just a second, right? And patch it up. Because, the loving thing is to just let her complain about it and not do anything about it because she just wants to express the pain that she has. So there's a whole lot to there. I probably shouldn't have brought that up. But anyway, the difficulty that we have is looking at people in the right way, in the appropriate way. We see them the way God sees us. That's what Romans 12:2 says, not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That relates to how we interact with people as well, just as like with everything else. Yeah.
If you want to approach it from a point of view or psychological standpoint, when we're approaching people, we need to understand that we could very easily be in the same situation as them.
Yeah.
Often we approach people that are either living in sin or in sin in some way, going, I would never, how could they? Instead of understanding, no, we could have, we
Yeah.
chose not to.
Right.
And they just didn't.
They didn't, yeah, for whatever reason. Yeah, so that's true. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. So their conscience as they're being raised has a lot to do with that. What they're okay with, what their parents allow, that kind of stuff.
He was tested and tried in all the different ways that he chose not to.
Yeah.
We forget that when we say those are people like Christ, that Christ also dealt with those things. Just made a choice.
Yeah. Right.
Not continue to make that.
So Jesus is the perfect example for us of that, the decisions that he made. And also, in approaching people, we recognize that they had to make decisions too. And if we're in their circumstances, we might have actually made the same decision. That doesn't mean that we would have, but we could have, right? So it's about empathy with that. But we have to balance things, right? We have to balance love and compassion with firmness that people need. That's part of love, and that's who God is. And that's why we're trying to do that. So we learn to see people differently. If, for example, if we see people as a burden, how is our service to them going to go? Not good. It won't last. If we see people as deserving of service, then what's the likelihood that we're going to continue? Of course. But we have to keep reminding ourselves of the bigger picture, because it can be very discouraging. And people who have done long-term care, it's very difficult for them to do it. I know that. I've seen it. And when people are involved in that, there's times when they really, because of our short-sightedness, we get really frustrated and angry when I quit and give up. But then we start looking again at the bigger picture, and we recognize what we're doing. This is valuable. This is worth the effort. And that's where we have to change our attitude, change our thinking, and continue to adjust it, right? Continue to look at that bigger picture. We see people as souls who are made in the image of God. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27, he made us in his own image. That makes us valuable, and we should recognize the value that each person has. We see our tasks as gifts to praise God. That's going to help as well. So we're doing things to praise him. Yeah. 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 That's true. And, there's a lot we could say about this. Labeling people is a very dangerous thing because when we put people in a label, we put them in a box and we say this is all of their identity. And that's what happens online. We see a lot of these people say, oh, you're just this kind of person. Well, that dehumanizes. We don't want to dehumanize. It's okay to recognize sin. We should. But we also need to recognize that there's more here. This is a complex thing. So, all right. So very quickly, let's move into goodness. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. Let us do good to all men. I've mentioned this before that there's a difference. There's two words in Greek that are translated as one word in English, good. And both of those words are synonyms, but they have nuances. And so in studying those out, you can see there's two sides of the coin for goodness. One side of the coin is doing things that are morally upright. That's good. It also good are things that are useful to other people, that we're helpful, we're being servant to other people. Those two ideas are used synonymously. They're interchangeable. In every place you find them, you'll see the other one being used to describe the same things. So we can't say that they're separate things. We're saying really that the idea that they're both there, that we're doing good things that are useful and helpful for other people. For example, we know that we shouldn't do things that are not good in order to benefit other people. We know that's not the case. But we often don't think of the fact that we shouldn't do good deeds that are not helpful for other people. Why would you do a good deed that is not helpful for other people, that it's not useful for them? It could be because you don't know that it's not useful, but let's assume that you know that it's not helpful for them, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Why would you do that? Sorry? Yeah, I mean, it could be morally upright, but not helpful, but it makes you feel better. Yeah, because now I'm doing a good deed, right? Look at me, I've got this deed done, but it doesn't actually help anything. In fact, it may be a burden to them. Well, that happens sometimes. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be anybody should feel guilty because they've done something that wasn't actually useful for someone. But the goal is to be as useful as possible in the deeds that are morally upright. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And that means that we're going to have to think about, we're going to kind of hone what we're doing. Your idea of what is going to help someone, you jump out and you start doing it and you start realizing, oh, this doesn't really help as much as this would. And what do you do when you realize that something would help better? You shift, right? You adjust and you say, I'm going to start doing this instead. And that's where good deeds come into play. I know this is generic and it's hard to deal with this in a sense of practicality, but if we have it in mind what we're trying to accomplish, then you can see easily how you have to make decisions that are going to affect how you interact with other people. And that's what this is all about, refining our efforts. And let's say, for example, that I decide my good deed, I'm going to do a good deed of serving coffee at 7 o'clock on Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning. How many of y'all would come to it? Some of you would come just because you love God and you want to serve and you want to help. I have no doubt of that because it's happened before, where things are outrageous, but people go anyway. So we have this 7 o'clock thing, and I get mad because nobody shows up to it. And the way I react is not to change that, but to say, listen, guys, I could browbeat y'all, and I could probably twist your arms into coming to 7 o'clock on Sunday morning, and some of you would come. Is it actually a good deed? It's morally upright, but it's certainly not useful. It's not helpful to anyone. So if we're putting people out in order to serve them, we're really not serving them that well. So our ability, our focus should be to find ways to get into their lives and help them, actually help. And that's a challenge, but it can only be done as we, through trial and error, I think. All right, thank y'all very much for your comments.